Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sean Emery. Every week we are examining something new, bringing you closer to companies, sectors, and themes. This recording should not be construed as a substitute for personalized individual advice from Avery & Company or any guest on the show. This is for educational purposes only and not intended to make an offer or solicitation for any companies or securities mentioned. With that, let's get on with the episode. All right. Hello, everyone. We are here with Dheeraj Pandey, the founder of Nutanix, now the founder of DevRev, someone that exudes passion for kind of anything he has put his fingers on. He has rolled his success into philanthropic efforts as well. I will let you talk more about that. Some great stuff there. But welcome, Dheeraj, to Inside Scoop.
Thank you, Sean. And we're looking forward to the opportunity to talk to your audience as well.
Yeah, so our goal is to not only get your insights into kind of where technology is going, but also understand how we got here, more importantly, how you got here. I think, again, pattern recognition is a real thing, and it's developed by really understanding the successful paths of those that have come before us, companies that have come before us. So you fit perfectly in that mold. You know, Dheeraj, let's start with your journey and your early years. I think for us is again, who was Dheeraj when you were born, where you were born, teenage years, and how you eventually got into things like computer science in Texas and some other areas.
Yeah. Looking back, born in 1975, and the first 4 years are blur to me because I used to be in this state of India, which was still sort of a very politically conscious state, and I'd say resonating with the rest of the country. And yet it was a landlocked state, so one of the poorer ones to begin with. And we moved to the capital city of that state in 1979. The silver lining was that there's lots of English schools in that area, and that's one of the, I would say, vestiges of the British rule, that you got a lot of English schools around that area. So my mom decided that we will be in the capital city, and my father had a transferring job, so he would go all around the state, but we'd stay in the capital city. But then I think what happened is this was those 10 years when I was going from 5 years to 15 years. That state started to become more and more lawless and became the poorest state of the country and the most lawless state of the country. And I think our economic status also deteriorated because my father was a government servant working for the state government, and he would get salaries every 6 months, every 9 months because of how corrupt the state was, And he got a lot of social help from my maternal side of the family and also the paternal side of the family. So I owe a lot to just social things at large, and I want to give back a lot what we've done in the last 2 decades here. When I was 17, I ended up at one of these competitive Indian engineering schools. It's called the Indian Institute of Technology, IIT. Was one of the top 100 students there, and therefore I was fortunate enough to get computer science. It was a very competitive major back then. 93 was just the beginning of what was happening in India with software. And in the year 96, after my junior year, I had a fork in the road. I could have ended up at Deloitte in Chicago. I could have ended up at Unilever in Mumbai. Or I had a few PhD scholarships, a fellowship from UT Austin and another one from Urbana-Champaign and USC and Columbia and places like that. And I decided to take the UT Austin offer because it was a fellowship, and at the same time, while the university took care of my education here, we didn't have enough money to buy a flight ticket from Delhi to Austin. And that's when a couple of the conglomerates in India, they helped me get $3,000, and I bought a ticket for $1,000, and I left $1,000 with my parents for their expenses, and I had $900 and 2 suitcases, and I took a couple of hops, and that was the first time I ever flew in life. I never had been at 35,000 feet in a seat. So there's a lot of coaching that people gave me, like this is how you use a seat belt and stuff like that. And I was almost 22. This is 97. I was almost 22. But I came here to Austin, and I was a PhD student in computer science, and in 98 I came to Redwood Shores and interned at Oracle and realized how big this bubble was. I'm like, wow, this is the time to be in the industry, not in academia. So I took a leave of absence from UT, and they were very gracious to give me a couple of years of leave. eventually they said, look, this can't keep going on forever. I ended up working for Trilogy Software in Austin, Texas for a year and a half, and really saw the excesses of the bubble, right, the internet bubble. And then at that time when I decided to move to California, and just literally drove. I had an option to turn right and go to Seattle, or turn left and come to California, and I chose the smaller company option. Again, when I was joining Trilogy, I had not offered to come to Oracle. I took the smaller company, and again, when I was joining this startup, Zambil, I again declined the big company Microsoft offer and instead came to a smaller company, like a really small company. So I've always had this thing for doing small things and seeing if I could get more autonomy and a better purpose and mastery and all that. So I ended up in this startup, saw the the best and the worst of the bubble, both the boom and the bust. Learn what not to do when you start a company or you run, create a company for the first time. I think we had some really good engineers in that company, and collectively we've gone on to do like 20-25 billion dollars worth of value creation in the enterprise. Just 5-6 of us.
Not bad, not bad.
Not bad. I think just happened to be one of those places which attracted good engineers, but we had relatively poor management structure there, or even product management, I would say. But learned a lot in those 3 years. I'd gotten married in the year 2000, so we had to hunker down after the bubble burst, and we sort of I would say endured in that same startup for 3 years. But then in 2003, I'm like, you know what? It's probably some time to get back to a big company, learn some software development in a larger company for building for the enterprise. So I joined Oracle Database for 4.5 years, learned a lot. But then, in 2006, I was itching to, again, go back to something small. And I figured maybe I'll apply to some business schools. And I said, I'm going to apply to only 3 B schools. And if I get to do full-time, I'll do full-time, but not really an exec program or anything, I was 31 at this time. I figured I'll only take a chance on 3 of the top 3 business schools, so Wharton, Stanford, and Harvard. And by 2007, I was shocked from my life, and I'd gotten rejected from all 3 schools because, I had followed a certain stereotype of an Indian engineer in software, and there's only so many that can actually take it. Plus, I was also older for the time. 31 was not a young age for Stanford or Harvard for MBAs. And I'm like, I still have to figure out something for myself, which is when, a recruiter called in 2007, and she was basically recruiting for this data warehouse company, Astra Data, which was really a snowflake of its time back in the day when there was no cloud. People were still trying to use commodity hardware and, distributed database, data warehouses. So I joined that company, learned a lot over those 2 years, but in 2007 and 2009, we were going through another global financial crisis. So every time I joined the startup, there was some crisis to the other that would happen. But I think great lessons. 3 of us, we knew each other for a while. One of the co-founders of the company Nutanix, we had worked in my startup in the year 2000, 2003, before I had joined Oracle. And then the other founder was also one of my best friends from my undergrad. So the 3 of us were there together coincidentally at this startup, Astra Data. And in 2009, while the financial crisis was still in its early days, we were just itching to go do something of our own. And that's when Nutanix happened. And this was September of 2009. So, the VC purse strings was still sort of, tight. But we figured, this was the time to do it. This is the time to do it. And we had a semblance of an idea. It wasn't really crisp, but we just knew that we had to be doing things autonomously and with a purpose that was ours. So that's what we ended up doing. And the story finessed in a matter of, 12, 18 months. And yeah, I did it for 11 and a half years and figured, I wanted to do a service company because Nutanix was still shipping software to on-site, sort of on-premise computing world. And so in 2020, when COVID happened, I'm like, you know what? It's time to actually be an investor and really operate something that I could think for the next 15 years, because I had another 15 years to give to at least this industry, if not more. I turned 45 in 2020, and I figured building a SaaS company would really bring me closer to the customers, because this is the thing that, what SaaS or cloud does is it really reduces complexity. We had like 20, 30,000 sites where our software used to run, and there were great lessons about customer support that I wanted to really make into a software, and that's how DevRev happened. So that's
Got
my
it.
45, 46 years of history in like 5-7 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's cool. Not quite enough for a book, but pretty close. So the next 15 years may get there. Now, so let's go back a little bit. So one thing that I think a lot of people recognize now is there's a lot of founders, a lot of executives from India. What do you think makes it such a special culture that when they do let's say come to the United States, born and raised here now in many cases, what's about the culture that you think is distilled or embedded inside that in the country and the individuals that come from there that have and allowed such successful entrepreneurial / executives?
So, again, I wouldn't want to pontificate, but I feel if I were to take a step back, it's emphasis on STEM, middle class upbringing, English. Just there's a ton of good English in India, and just everything is taught in English. So that melds you well with the rest of the West. And
Sure.
I think middle class, when I say that, I mean there is some natural sort of empath that middle classes actually produce. Like there's a certain automatic behavior around, I would say, subservience and towards customers and thinking about everybody as a customer and so on, and a certain sense of vulnerability and humility that comes from that. Look, I got so much help from my family around me, and we used to struggle so much, and we had nothing. So let's see what it means to really be vulnerable and a little bit humble.
Yeah. And then continuing going backwards, I guess so you had a lot of lessons and a lot of journeys along the way. One thing I picked up, and I've heard your stories over the years for sure. And one thing I picked up is really around going from, you had all these forks in the road, and it seems like every single time you almost took the hardest road. And when I say hardest, I mean the road that wasn't as obvious. Going to the smaller startup instead of the big resume builder per se. We have a lot of founders that are on here. We have investors that are on here as well, and just anything you can share around as you reflect backwards of all those little pivots in your journey. Why potentially going down the less obvious path was the right move. I don't know if anything. I'm sure you've thought about this stuff over the years, and when you hit 45, you reflected backwards. You're obviously somebody that reflects a lot. So anything you could share?
I think it's the quest for autonomy. This country is sort of built on the tenets of liberty and freedom, and I think small companies just give you more autonomy to do things, and you become more of a full stack person. So you get to see the breadth of being a generalist. The book Range actually talks about this in a really good way, about how there's a lot of folks who are generalists who will do well in this era. And I always wanted to get that full stack exposure. What does it mean to think about design and product management and customers and being close to customers and all that? I think that was at the core of most of my decision making. I always thought that in a startup I would have more of an influence. So whether it was joining Trilogy versus Oracle, or joining this company Zambil versus Microsoft, or coming to Aster, or starting Nutanix, or now doing DevRev, I think it's about autonomy. And every time I've taken a decision like this, it's been consequential. Each of these, when I didn't take the obvious path, I think they've been meaningfully good decisions. And sometimes it also becomes self-fulfilling, because you're like, well, I took this riskier path, I have to make it succeed. There's no other way now, because I'm taking this contrarian view now that you're going against the mob in some sense.
Yeah, I think your views historically, over the years, listening to you, speaking with parts of your team, you've always had a contrarian mindset, going back to your journey in general, but going back to the origin of like a Nutanix, and being able to create something with that contrarian view. So let's fast forward a little bit to today, to kind of extract some of your views of the moment we're living in. And I don't mean the macro moment per se, but I mean more technology today. Maybe just start at a very high technology macro level where we are from your point of view. And then maybe I'll just try to plug in some questions along that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, without coming with platitudes, I'm sure everybody knows in your audience what's happening with tech. But I think at a more subtle level, consumer grade is going to be everywhere, and that means mobile has to be really well done in B2B. And I feel like, now that we've gotten into subscription consumption era with everything SaaS, and there's going to be a need to really understand retention and why are we churning customers and how do we improve net dollar-based expansion, and also how do you use tech for all things sales and marketing. And there was an era for doing like automation of marketing and automation of Salesforce, but I think that was the last 2-3 decades of what I call the physics of these things. But now there's needs to be chemistry around this, where you go from basic elements of sales CRM in the 90s and marketing CRM in the 2000s and support CRM in the 2010s to like, wow, we've created all these silos, but nobody understands the end user and like, what do they use and why do they use what they use and why are they churning and why do they love us? So I feel like we need to really get into an integration mode. And this kind of happened in the 90s too. People started talking about integration in a big way, but it was more generic bottoms up integration. I feel like the way to integrate companies and their software and whatever SaaS they're doing is to really have them pivot on the product and end user. If everything can be around the product and the end user, then it helps make go-to-markets more efficient. It improves net dollar-based expansion of subscription and all these things, rather than throwing a ton of people. I mean, even at Nutanix, I mean, if you go back to our history last 10 years, we had a relatively legacy go-to-market distribution of, our product was two-tier channel, and there was a 1-to-1 SE to rep ratio, and we had employees in 60 countries, and on, because it was shipping code to people's premises. And I feel like what SaaS did was extremely formidable and really well done. The fact that you have a canonical deployment, there's one deployment, you control it, you upgrade it, and you can figure out what new features go to which customers and so on. You can do tons of experimentation, A/B testing, all that stuff. So the idea of a cloud is a very efficient idea, including for rolling out new products and features and testing things, and also distributing your features through one and only one representation of your code, which is the cloud itself. But along the way, I think go-to-markets will have to get more efficient. As I was telling you, like we were spending $1 billion to get to $1.6 billion, and I think it was great for its time. But this coming decade will be about product doing more, and SE to rep ratios coming down, and this idea of PLG, which product-led growth, will actually be done through code, just like e-commerce companies did it in the last 25 years, where there was a ton of efficiency. There was no sales in e-commerce. They had a product catalog and they do a ton of marketing and a ton of automation and all that. So many lessons will need to come from e-commerce into B2B.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep going if you got more.
Yeah, I mean, obviously
ideas.
there is. To do all this stuff, you need to really get good at search and machine learning and mobile apps and things like that. Things that the enterprise B2B market always ignored, simply because you could throw people at the problem. I think going forward, because of COVID as well, I think remote work, teleselling, all that stuff, you can do $1 million deals on a video call, actually. So the world is flatter. You can do 25, 50K deals out of emerging market employees rather than everybody sitting here. So if anything, the front office also gets more dispersed and distributed after COVID. Now that people have tasted success with remote selling and video calls and all this stuff, to do pretty large deals too. I feel like we are surface of this.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think, yeah, I mean, the consumer side, consumer grade, I guess you've always been around simplicity, and simplicity, I guess, does two things, right? It gives the user a really good experience, which is what, at the end of the day, what you're trying to serve for. But at the same time, does at some point, consumer grade everywhere, right? In a sense. What does churn look like down the road when everything is much more integrated? Again, you even just said it. 20 years ago, people were striving for integration, and we're still not fully there at all today. So maybe it's a question that we're talking 2 decades out from now, as opposed to anything in the near future. And it's really around getting people on a single product that then potentially morphs into a platform. And that's the ultimate goal or state, where you have like the Airtables and Notions that are trying to go kind of singular and then horizontal and then vertical in all different directions. And code is really flexible in that manner. What do you think about that concept, where there's a lot of kind of products that are kind of do everything for everyone, and that ultimately opens the door for, I think, potentially more churn and more kind of experimentation from the consumer standpoint. Everyone gets in that cycle of like, what's my best task manager, and they're just shuffling through all of them. I know I'm talking about specifically around project management right now, but I think a lot of that, as Airtable becomes kind of like an exposed database, but not really. And some other kind of technologies that sit out there in the world. Just in general, what do you think about that concept in general?
Yeah, I mean, for the smaller end of the market, there will be a notion of a super app, and the reasons are because, these companies like Zoho and Freshworks and others, actually, even Microsoft for its time in the early 90s was all about, we deliver everything to the SMB. And of course, they had a really good API culture, and back in its time, the DCOM, and obviously the internet model that they actually eventually embraced. It was an SMB company, and then they really moved into the larger enterprise over time. But I feel like there will be a place for super app for the startups. I think in the mid-market and the larger enterprise, you'll need to focus on one buyer really well and see if you can do a really good job for that one buyer with multiple products. I mean, I look at Datadog and I'm like, you know what? They've done a really good job of going after the same buyer with 5 products. So the go-to-market is more efficient. Others who have tried to go after, even if they are a SaaS company or an API company, if they go after multiple buyers, then their go-to-markets actually become less efficient because the leverage is reduced. The trust needs to be rebuilt and so on. So I feel like if you have a single buyer to go after, they'll trust you more if you have more apps for them.
Got it.
Second or third app. I think Twilio is suffering a little bit because they went from the developer and doing communication platform as a service to now going after support and marketing. These are different buyers. So you need different kinds of sellers to really go after them, and the leverage reduces. At the same time, I think what has changed and what will change in the enterprise going forward, I feel, is this idea that everything needs to go through an SE and a rep to begin with. We've already seen this in the last 10 years, but I think this decade is the first decade where SaaS will be built truly cloud natively, because the last 5-7 years, cloud was proven to be a good model. But now this decade, you'll see highly efficient SaaS companies come out because they built everything cloud natively, and that means even the way you program the platform is all happening with Amazon's abstractions or Google's abstractions, as opposed to the SaaS companies' closed ecosystem abstractions. I mean, the way ServiceNow was done 20 years ago with Workflow Engine, I think it was great for the last 20 years. But the next 20 years, I think developers are looking for, give me my Lambda function, my serverless, my containers, and this and that, my Mongo and all that stuff. So we'll see a new breed of SaaS companies emerge that have truly built themselves in the cloud native platforms, and they look like they're truly integrated with their developers' experience as well.
Got it. One other question around tech trends before we get into like DevRev and how you're solving problems there. The AI, there's the buzzwords of AI. I found it pretty interesting, the other day. C3 AI reports and they couldn't forecast, some of their deals got delayed and so on, and a couple other things that have happened over the last several quarters. Where are we in the state of AI? Because if the number one AI company is having trouble potentially forecasting quarter to quarter, and I know that's not like the whole purpose of AI is to forecast customer bookings and trends. Where are we in the state of AI, and how real are we at like true forecasting capabilities where, we're not just doing the same linear regressions we were doing, over the last several decades?
I feel like AI is a means to an end, and therefore it cannot be a product. It's a technology. The best AI companies, they don't even market AI. If anything, Google is not these days doesn't even want to talk about AI because somehow it reduces the trust people have in Google or
Right.
something. Same thing with Facebook.
It's a bad
because
word.
the fiasco that happened with the elections in 2016 and such. Apple does so much of AI with photography, computational photography, but they don't talk about it. They're like, yeah, we just do it. So I feel the best companies that really nail AI, they don't talk about AI. They just talk about experience, and they talk about design and the element of surprise and serendipity for the end user, recommendations and things of that nature, as opposed to AI. Now, if you look at C3 AIs of the world, I feel like it's McKinsey plus plus. So it's extremely bespoke. Everything is bespoke because unless you really have a piece of software that nails at least the transactional side of things, CRM actually nails transactions, ServiceNow nails transactions. All the popular business software companies, they first nail transactions, then they try to nail engagement, the way Slack does, and finally you nail intelligence. People still pay for transactions. You're like, hey, day-to-day workflows and day-to-day approvals and day-to-day ticketing and all that stuff is the hardware that everybody is comfortable paying for. Then when you look at the large enterprise, they're like, I don't know if I want to pay for Slack because it's too expensive. I can stay with a more inexpensive bundled teams. So even engagement becomes a big deal to pay for in the larger enterprise, especially the ones that are in those verticals that are growing at 3%, like GDP rate of growth or something. And finally, intelligence. But people are unwilling to pay for intelligence that much. If it's really McKinsey plus plus, these are really handcrafted deals. So I feel like AI that's really done for the masses will never be talked about. It's just going to show through consumer grade experience. And any AI that is doing $50, $100 million deals like Palantir or C3 or those, there will be a market for that, but it's not for the mid market. It's not for the horizontal enterprise SaaS. It's really built for a bespoke, we are way better than McKinsey kind of thinking.
Got it. No, that's a good perspective. I like that. Let's go to DevRev. What problems are you solving? Where was the I don't want to ask about timing when the idea was formed, but basically in general, like what problem are you solving? I watched the product launch, I think on Product Hunt and some other things that over the last several weeks and months. Where are you in that journey? What's the idea and kind of backwards, what's the idea and where are you in that journey?
We had about 1,500 developers at Nutanix, and they all loved talking to customers, and customers just appreciated anytime there was an escalation or on-call. On the other side of the Slack channel was a developer, and they appreciated how much we respected them if you got a developer or a maker or a product manager in them with the Slack channel. And Slack was just a real-time way to really collaborate outside the premises of our company by bringing these customers into real-time something. And we hadn't done a very good job of the back office of Jira and Atlassian's sort of system of record for engineering, software engineering, and everybody just wanted to avoid going to Jira to do anything. It was really a place for records, but not a place for engagement and delight. And also, we had done a really good job of emanating the Salesforce news to everybody. So we had built connectors that would bring a lot of CRM news, in a compliant way, so that one couldn't predict a quarter and all that. But every win alert was celebrated by every employee, and that's how we got the customer embedded into the culture of the company, which is why the NPS was so high, because the customer was not like 4 hops away from the back office or 3 hops away from the mid office. So this idea that we need to make the customer and the product the centerpiece of all execution, strategy, culture was the piece that was in my head for the longest time. And I think when I figured we'll do a SaaS company, my co-founder, who I had known for 30 years, he said, what would it mean to really take this bespoke idea of NPS of 90 and really create a software out of it? And how do you do this? And it's a very nebulous thing to say, hey, let's go make customer-centric companies happen in the world out there. So we we first thought of a platform. Like, okay, this platform needs to not be a departmental level tool. Like, sales CRM was built for Salesforce automation back in the time when enterprise reps were still king, and $10 million and $5 million were the way you do deals. And then marketing CRM came, and it was about campaigns and automating marketing in the 2010s. And then support CRM became a big deal last decade. But they were all departmental tools. And none of them would actually really have a view of what's the product, who uses them, and what's in it for the end user, which is why we started to really create new departments like customer success, which like really infuriates people like Slootman at Snowflake. Like, what do you mean there's a department called customer success? Everybody does customer success. But the only way you can do that is if everybody understands customers. So the idea of DevRev was to really look at these sort of the life cycle of a product, the way it's built, the way it's operated in a cloud, to the way it's supported with support engineers, and finally the way you look at growing that business. So there are really 4 quadrants: the build quadrant of where developers live, the operate quadrant where cloud ops people live, the support quadrant, top right, which is where support engineers live, and then finally the grow quadrant where growth engineers live. And so, okay, so these are the 4 quadrants, and how do we really have them believe that there's one goal and nothing but one, true north? And that was end user and product. So we really took all these CRMs and said, no, these are all done wrong. One of them focuses on the buyer, the other one focuses on leads, the other one focuses on again, buyers and admins, but no one focuses on users and the product. So this idea was about a product-centric and user-centric CRM. We call it Dev CRM. But then again, a platform, you can't sell a platform. Just like at Nutanix, we had HCI was the platform, but there was a use case for virtual desktops that emerged after Snowden in 2013, where people said, look, laptops will never leave a building, and you can have remote workforce with a digital windows coming through the cloud. So our killer use case in this platform begins with support. It's like, look, let's go nail support, and only for SaaS companies and tech companies and software companies, because support CRM, the way it's been done, has been done horizontally for all industries, and a support software for a pawn shop is the same as a support software for a tech company, and that makes no sense.
Right.
So we're here to really nail support software, understand how it needs to be product centric, give a ton of data to support engineers and product managers, and then connect it back to the back office, where the underbelly of software happens. Because what Atlassian does in the back office and what Zendesk or some of these other companies do in the front office, they're 2 sides of the same coin. So you need to really bring a Slack-like culture between the back office systems of record and the front office system of record. So we really learned a lot from Slack, and we said we got to really apply it to a bigger structure, which is more support-oriented, and finally, software engineering-oriented. So you'll see us come out with support for SaaS as our first product. Eventually, we want to go and replace Atlassian as well, Jira as well, but it's probably 2 years down the road or something.
2 years, you're replacing Atlassian. I love it.
Yeah, time will come. I mean, obviously,
no, that's awesome.
They're like, they're like a VMware of what Nutanix had to face, and we need to have some audacious goals out there. And at the same time, there's leverage in the platform. Honestly, we feel like there's so much leverage around the object model and customizability and a workflow engine and the UI and everything else for support and build and things like that, that you don't have to think about building a second product. It's really a second app on the same platform.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So as of right now, so in the journey, in terms of the build of this, I think you just launched a beta version, or you actually have a general availability?
It's a couple of months from a GA, but we put pen to paper in April of last year.
Nice.
And it's been 18 months, and about 100 odd engineers. We raised about 65 million in the last. It's still a seed round. It's an open convertible note, and we've just converted that into a token on Ethereum. So now anybody can put $50,000, and it's all digitized, and we don't have to do any manual paperwork, and we keep a copy of it for Carta as well. So we are thinking that one of the other things that PLG companies will need is also continuous funding, where you're building an order book along the way. You don't have to do waterfall, large investment rounds once a year, once in 2 years. So yeah, I think we've kept this thing going. We did 50 million, and then Every month we do a couple of million, and there's lots of people who just want to put $1 million, $500,000, 250K kind of things.
That's interesting. Yeah, we'll talk about that after this, but that's probably a whole nother conversation. But the oh wow, that's interesting. So you plan launch in a couple months in terms of general availability. You have 100 engineers already. One thing on that is, what did you learn that you think you are going to bring to DevRev that is going throughout your whole career, right? What have you learned throughout your whole career that you think you're going to execute on, or maybe have done different at any part in your journey at DevRev that you think is just going to take DevRev to another place? Because every stepping stone you've done, you've gone from, other companies where you're an employee to building a business that, valued multiple billions of dollars, to now DevRev, and hopefully the threshold, I think you just laid it out there. You're going to be going after the Atlassians of the world, which I believe is like a $60-70 billion business overall. So what lessons can people take? It's kind of going back to the origin of this conversation, and then now to the future of yourself.
Well, on the good side, just the fact that you can really be customer centric and be subservient to customers, and have them continue to love you. I think that piece is something that I picked from Nutanix and will continue to keep going at this company as well. Of course, in a more automated way, more efficient way, because as I said, with a cloud and canonical deployment, a singular deployment, you can do a lot of things way more efficiently. You can upgrade code 5 times a day and keep it up and running all the time. I think cloud has immense economies of scale compared to 30,000 sites in some sense. I think on the go-to-market side, I think there's a ton of lessons learned at Nutanix. I mean, we copy-pasted the NetApp VMware EMC model from the 90s, the Cisco's model from the 90s. And in the world of cloud, when you're digitally delivering stuff, when you know that onboarding a free customer can be done with no people involved, I think you push more to the product, you push more to design, you push more to zero touch and low touch. You really have to design, assuming there's nobody in the room when a potential free customer or user is actually coming to try out your product. So I think those are things which I was trying to do in the last couple of years at Nutanix, but anytime you have to ship code, you need people to do anything, rack, stack, mount, all sorts of things, So I think it frees up my hand now because we're doing a cloud service. We can really be more opinionated about onboarding and in-app learning and in-app nudges and all sorts of things that were actually a lot more expensive. Even like marketing was way more expensive in a B2B company of the year rather than the next generation B2B company. SE to rep ratio. If the product does more, you don't need so many people to demo the product and to show you a deck of slides. The whole era of showing a deck of slides to start a customer meeting is preposterous now. The user already knows you. By the time you go out there, you already have a $10,000 spend with a couple of departments or teams or something like that. So that's what we need to go nail. Where now when you have a rep going in there, they might not need an SE. They'll not need an SE. SE to rep ratios will look 5-1 or 10-1 or something. You can. So really, the idea of PLG is not going to be one or the other. Hey, everything becomes like e-commerce, and there's no need for sales reps. But I think you'll do it a lot more efficiently. You need to go from freemium to credit cards using a ton of automation, a ton of analytics, a ton of data. Going from credit cards, $5,000 spend to a 25K inside sales, I think you'll need a ton of data to know which ones to call. Going from 25K to 50K, field rep doing. So there's a lot of baton passing that will happen along the way. And that's how you make for a more efficient go-to-market, So that's the thing that I feel you can do a lot more through data, warehousing, every click being captured and analyzed, every customer being captured and analyzed, tons of, think about B2B companies of the past, the support contact database and the marketing contact database, they don't talk to each other. So most marketers of the erstwhile enterprise companies, they only market to leads, as opposed to let's go upsell to the existing users, and because they already trust you and love you and so on. So these are all the lessons that I learned, in those 11 and a half years, that I feel like there's an opportunity to engineer some of this stuff through automation and cloud and so on.
Interesting. Cool. Let's skip a last little segment here. We talked about it at the beginning, which is Texas and your philanthropic work. Obviously, I'm only calling out one. You made a large donation to, I believe, Cancer Foundation for AI. I think that's why I was bringing it up before. But in general, just talk about the work you're doing there. You've had a very successful career life, and you're now flipping that on the other side, where you're building again, but you're also you're giving at the same time, which is pretty awesome. Just talk about the work you, your family, your wife, and your organization are doing there.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me about that. The idea there is to, just age gracefully and learn along the way. I mean, I couldn't do a company in computational oncology, but I could definitely fund something and be a fly on the wall with some of these researchers, and also use that to invest in companies. So we've invested in some life sciences biotech companies as part of our family office. But biology and computing, the lines will blur. I probably wouldn't have been able to summon courage to start a company in that space because, I probably don't know enough. But I figured, if you could just go sit with these researchers and, professors and still bring, the idea is to converge departments. Like at UT, there's a machine learning lab, there are oncologists, there are physicians, there's the Dell Medical School, but they all have different specialization. And I think the goal was if you could really use this to converge multiple departments where they can all sit together. And sometimes it's not all about AI, sometimes it's just about statistics, it's just mathematical models, but you need to put some of these things in the cloud. So at one of these efforts there at UT, they're great at what they do with mathematical models, but they just don't know how to put this in the cloud so that it increases collaboration across different providers and hospitals and scientists. So we're doing some of those things that just comes naturally to software people like us, but doesn't come for them either. So it's not just about money, which we have, done about $10 million to UT Austin, but between Dell Medical School and the machine learning lab, but it's also time, things that appear obvious to us, but it could be great help for some of those scientists out there, And again, the goal is to, we've gone through COVID in the last couple of years. We know that, 3D printing and computer science and biology will blur. The lines will blur. And what better than just bring at least one facet of this, which is computer science, to the table. And again, not everything is AI. There's a lot of things that are way simpler than AI, even machine learning, actually. There's mathematical models that are good enough for most of these things, And yet to be able to do this repeatably and collect data and engineer a lot of these solutions in the cloud and all that stuff is just hard problems to solve,
Yeah, no, that's great. Cool. I think, look, we'll end there. We're rolling up on the hour. I wanted to thank you, number one, for coming on, taking some time out. Your journey has been exciting to watch from the sidelines in some ways, and then also, we have always been big advocates of yourself in terms of who you are or exude as a person from the outside looking in. So you see that, I think, in the journey that you've lived from kind of early beginnings with $900 to now providing your hard-earned capital to foundations such as Texas, but at the same time showing your entrepreneurial spirit here with DevRev, that it just doesn't leave, so that's super exciting to watch. We'll be watching DevRev. Hopefully we'll be tweeting about it or something like that when you are launching. We saw it on Product Hunt, so I believe you'll be successful in that as well. But again, I wanted to appreciate or let you know that we appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us and sharing your insights.